Stocks will rally tomorrow, Thursday, May 29th, after a three-judge panel ruled earlier today that most of the tariffs imposed by Trump exceeded his authority as the President of the United States. Of the three judges on the panel, one was appointed by Trump, one by Obama, and one by President Reagan. The panel issued a summary judgment against the U.S. government and enjoined the government from enforcing all tariffs imposed by Trump using executive orders that relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, and that would be most of the tariffs that he has imposed. I have discussed the very shaky legal basis for those executive orders using that 1977 Act in prior posts. The legal problem, and this is just a matter of constitutional and statutory law, which Trump will violate unless restrained by the judiciary, is that the 1977 Act does not specifically grant the president the right to impose tariffs, an exclusive right granted to Congress by the Constitution. When a determination is made that there is an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security or the U.S. economy that originates in whole or in part outside the United States, the president can declare under this 1977 Act a national emergency and regulate certain economic transactions and to freeze assets to deal with that threat. The first legal issue for the courts to decide involves the provision of the U.S. Constitution that grants Congress, not the president, exclusive authority to impose tariffs. Congress has not approved any of Trump's tariff taxes. The Republicans certainly would not want to impose those tariff taxes by voting on them. One legal issue is whether Congress can even delegate its tariff power to the executive branch. That's the first legal issue. If delegation is permitted to some extent, then the second issue is whether the 1977 Act contains a, quote, clear congressional authorization, end quote, to delegate any kind of broad authority to the president to impose tariffs in the manner that Trump has done so far. This latter issue is called the, quote, major question doctrine, end quote, of statutory construction, and it's based on the separation of powers doctrine. The major question doctrine is favored greatly by the 6 Republican justices, and they're very steadfast in adhering to that doctrine, as shown in their immunity decision, the presidential immunity from criminal prosecution decision, at least when the following that doctrine achieves the results that they want. It is also difficult for the government to maintain that an imbalance of trade between foreign countries and the United States, something that has been around for about 50 years now, is an emergency and constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the United States that would justify the exercise of emergency powers by the president. The government has already appealed the judgment enjoining the enforcement of almost all of Trump's tariffs to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and ultimately this will be decided by the 6 Republican justices on the Supreme Court. This issue can be resolved by both the Federal Appellate Court and the Supreme Court fairly quickly, in my opinion, since the central issues are legal ones involving the non-delegation doctrine, the major questions doctrine, and the separation of powers doctrine. And the Supreme Court Republican justices are major proponents of the major question and separation of powers doctrines. So the starting point for this kind of legal analysis is that the Constitution gives Congress the exclusive power to impose tariffs, and Congress has done nothing to impose them.